Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining us today for Designing Skills-Based Microcredentials to Meet Industry Needs. My name is Jennifer Fong. I am the Senior Director of Continuing Education and Workforce Development here at IEEE. And we are so excited about this webinar, and we are so delighted that you all are here. Today, we are going to explore how to design skills-based micro-credentials that meet industry needs. And we're going to talk about some of the challenges that come with that and some ways to overcome that. But before we dive in, we are going to share some housekeeping tips. First of all, for technical support, if you are having technical issues, please send a message you'll see in the chat. Do that drop down and send that over to the host, and we will see if we can help you out there. And also use that chat function to submit your questions, and you can send that to all. And we really do want you to participate. So please feel free to use that chat function, or you can even send a reaction to the content. There's some fun little tools there. You got that little smiley face with the plus on it. Make generous use of that if you would like to. And this session is being recorded, and we will be sending you an email with the recording after the session, and also a link to the IEEE credentialing website. So just to get started, for those of you who may be new to IEEE, we are the world's largest not-for-profit technical professional organization for engineers and technologists. We are dedicated to advancing technology for humanity. And we have been verifying technical credentials for over 30 years. So we've been doing this a long time, but we are really super excited to start really talking about skills-based micro-credentials and how they really are a game changer for some folks. My background, I have been with IEEE for over 9 years now, and I am delighted to share with you an incredible group of speakers. We are missing one at the moment. We're hoping he's going to be able to log in shortly, but I am going to pass it over to Adam Stieg to introduce himself.
Sure, thanks, Jennifer. My name is Adam Stieg. I'm joining you from Los Angeles. I spend my days at UCLA, where I've been for the last 25 years, teaching, doing research, and running research infrastructure. So my role at UCLA, depending on the day, I wear various different hats. I am the Associate Director of the California Nanosystems Institute, which is to some extent a sort of center of gravity at UCLA for advanced technology infrastructure, including imaging facilities, clean rooms, etc. And I do various different things at UCLA, like I mentioned. I got brought into the fold here. I've been getting much more engaged in workforce development and micro-credentialing under obviously the activities of the CHIPS Act, our participation in the California Dreams Hub under the Microelectronics Commons program, where I'm one of the PIs on that. And so we're actively developing a lot of stuff that we'll talk about today. So it's a real pleasure to be here this morning. I guess it's morning for me, almost afternoon for many of you, but thanks, Jennifer.
Thanks for being here, Adam. And I'd also like to introduce Melanie Booth. Melanie, please.
Thank you, Jen. And Adam, it's morning for me too. I'm joining you from San Diego, California. I'm serving as IEEE's skills-based micro-credential consultant, and I've been working with the team now for several months to create the framework and the system and the approach for really connecting learning to work. I work across the learn and work ecosystem on a variety of initiatives, both nationally and internationally. And this is a really important one, and one that I'm very excited to be participating in because I think it will change lives. Jen, I'll turn it back to you.
Fantastic. And Amy, actually, Matt is here. Could you just go ahead quick and elevate him, and we will get him so he can introduce himself as well.
Good timing.
Yeah, perfect timing, Matt. And here he comes. So Matt, you can go ahead and unmute yourself, and you can go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hi. So yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here today. My name's Matt Francis. I'm the founder and president and CEO of Ozark Integrated Circuits in Fayetteville, Arkansas, celebrating our 15th year this month. And
Woohoo.
we do high temperature electronics for aerospace, defense, and energy applications. I have been involved with IEEE in many, many roles over the years. I just came off being the director for Region 5, the U.S. Southwest, and very involved in workforce development and things around semiconductors and the CHIPS Act. And so very excited to be here and talk about what we're doing in credentialing here with IEEE and to support the semiconductor industry and other industries.
Thanks, Matt. So as you can see, this is an amazing panel, and I'm super excited to have this conversation today. This is the second webinar in this series. We're going to be doing a series of these as everybody is trying to make sense of micro-credentials because in some ways it really is sort of the Wild West out there. Lots of people say they offer micro-credentials, but they all mean different things. So part of the goal that IEEE has right here is to really help to start to standardize what a skills-based micro-credential is, what it is we're talking about here, and really help to make credentials that are meaningful to industry because they understand what they are. So if you've missed our first webinar defining what skills-based micro-credentials are and their impacts on industry and workforce development, we are going to share a link in the chat so that you can watch it on demand. But first, we're going to dive in with just a very, very quick refresher. So there we go. Now, there are a lot of different types of credentials that are out there. Today, we are talking about micro-credentials and specifically skills-based micro-credentials. They are on the right side here because they really are a more accessible, often less expensive type of credential. And they're really focused on assessing skills that people have. And as we are looking at the other types of credentials, you know, you've got university degrees and two-year degrees. These are super important. And these are things that really help people to work their way up in tech fields. However, not every job necessarily needs a university degree, especially some of these technician roles and other roles. And so when people are looking to get into some of these STEM fields, there are other pathways as we move to the right. Certifications, for example, these are built around a specific body of knowledge. Somebody typically needs to take an assessment exam, which they prepare for and spend money to get ready for and then pay to take. And then they get certified in a specific area. Again, there are very stringent rules around those things. As we move to the right, however, as we get to certificates, as we get to micro-credentials and digital badges, things like that, they are more accessible, but there are fewer rules around them. And because of that, it's really important that you can trust the provider. And if they're third-party validated, that does help industry to make sure that people can do the thing that the credential says that they can do. Next slide, please. So Melanie, could you talk a little bit about what we're talking about with IEEE skills-based micro-credentials?
Yeah, thank you. Well, we are talking about skills and we are talking about assessing skills and validating that each individual learner, regardless of how much time they may spend, quote, in the seat or in a program, that they can really demonstrate and perform those skills that a particular micro-credential is aiming for. And the second part of that is that these skills are what employers are really looking for. And I know Matt's going to talk about that in a little bit. But really, the assessment is really a critical component here. What we have designed, as you'll see in the image on the right, is several levels, 3 different levels. Each micro-credential can be identified along level 1, which is foundational knowledge or comprehension. Level 2, which is real proficiency with some applied skills. And level 3 is the larger kind of collection of abilities in order to perform tasks, in order to be able to meet the needs of the industry field. and that is at what we call a mastery level. The beautiful part about this is it also provides a lot of flexibility, so that we can say, okay, here's the level of learning that we're aiming for. And those levels can stack up over time and in a variety of different directions. We also are using digital credentialing or badges. And the value of that is that each of those contains the metadata that explains all of the components of what is in that microcredential and how that learner has demonstrated their knowledge, their applied skills, or their abilities. So it offers both a standardized framework. It offers a language with which we can convey to those seeking talent what a person knows and can what they can do. And it offers the flexibility in terms of programming. So these skills could be developed, for example, through an apprenticeship. They could be developed in a lab. They could be developed in a course. And they may or may not be connected to a program of time. So we're trying to get both the flexibility, meeting the technical field's needs, and also really supporting learners with kind of new pathways into and through their careers.
So, we hear a lot, Melanie, about the skilling, upskilling, reskilling. Can you take us a little bit through the differences on that?
Yeah, sure. So as we've been working with IEEE to really think about what is the model of skills-based microcredentials that will bridge the gap between educational and training providers and between what industry needs in terms of talent, we're really thinking about also the changing environment and the nature of work. And so skilling is really like, what does a person need to do to be able to do the entry-level tasks that employers are really desperately seeking in terms of their talent strategies. And then we also know that people can progress through their jobs and through their industry pathways. So how can skills-based microcredentials really help upskill and help people add skills as they work through the microcredentials and as they also work through their career paths? Of course, with all of the changes in the ecosystem, particularly the rate of change with technology, new skills are also important. So reskilling allows learners to potentially pivot a little bit and allows industry to be able to meet their emerging needs in their workforce. So again, I think the value of the design that we put in place here is that the skills-based microcredentials from IEEE can do all of these things because they do allow for flexibility within a quality framework.
Excellent, thanks. So, how do we do this? That's what we're here to talk about today. And we have Matt Francis and Adam Stieg here to speak from both the industry as well as the academic perspective on how we design skills-based microcredentials that matter to employers. Because at the end of the day, if industry doesn't recognize it, if it doesn't matter to industry, if it doesn't mean that someone can get a job, then we're kind of all wasting our time here. And so I'd like to start with Matt. Matt, can you tell us a little bit about your experience and what you've seen work?
Sure. So an interesting aspect of what I do with my company is we kind of have to do everything. We don't just design chips. We also do packaging. We also, we have to do operational things. We have to manage a supply. And so one of the things that I encountered that I found fascinating of how well credentialing can work and move an industry forward has been in cybersecurity. Because we do a lot of work in the defense space, and so as new cybersecurity requirements rolled out, we were able to walk. There were credentialing opportunities for my employees, and that we were able to successfully use that, and actually ended up becoming one of the first companies in the country to be certified under CMMC level 2, which is not just electronics, that just covers anyone that works within the government circles. That was a credentialing solution essentially because there were authorities that had created those programs, and like you said, they could assess that the person had the skills, which then helped me assess that my company could get those certifications. So that's a very clear path. In other spaces, it's much more complicated. If we're talking about electronic design, we're talking about how we use basic skills to allow us to do everything from design to use AI, to do electronic packaging. It's not as standardized in those worlds, and that's where I think there's a lot of opportunity for innovation and collaboration.
Awesome, thanks. And let me ask you, as you are considering hiring people or upskilling your folks, what kinds of mechanisms do you have in place? Like, are you looking for these? I mean, I think that's a question that a lot of training providers
I said, I think it depends on the area. In some areas of business, it's much more, a classic example is accounting, right? There's a very clear path of certifications and so forth. In more of the like science and engineering fields, we're looking for those, absolutely. But what we're also looking for is there to start getting some consensus on what are the accepted credentials. And so, yeah, we're definitely looking for those, but we're also not seeing them a lot yet, right? And so that's why I said I'm excited about these conversations. I would say in like like if we're looking at undergraduates, we would love to see a micro-credential on Python or Linux skills, because those are areas where we end up finding we have to essentially train people. Unless they sought those skills out on their own or got lucky enough to take the right class, we have a hard time divining that they have that skill set from what it says on their curriculum.
That's awesome. Thank you. And so now let's shift a little bit to the challenges that training providers and higher educators run into when they're designing skills-based micro-credentials for industry. Adam, I know that you have run into some complexities as you're trying to figure out what industry needs. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. I mean, Matt sort of gives a perfect example, which is that, when we were tasked a few years ago to start developing workforce development programs by the state of California to meet unmet industry needs, but were not defined, the question is, what are those industry needs, right? And so, of course, the standard is that you go to large organizations that generally represent the big players in the space, and they define what industry need is. But as Matt just mentioned, a startup or a mid-scale company has a completely different operational model and different skills that they need. So there's no one size fits all approach that we can take. We can take guidance from one of the large semiconductor organizations that says that this is what we're looking for. The CHIPS Act lays out we need to bring on thousands of technicians and trained engineers in at warp speed. But the question is, how do we flexibly do that, but do it in a way that actually maps onto what the jobs are, right? And so much of what we've done in academia is based on traditional university coursework, right? 4-year degree programs and what that sequencing looks like. But how do we rapidly pivot to address needs that are not unknown, but are not necessarily well defined or communicated to us? And there's myriad considerations there, whether it be, are we designing for a big, manufacturing fab? Are we designing for a startup company? And where is that, and how does that map onto our local regionality, right? Like, we've got different sectors, different sizes, different locations, different cohorts of learners, as you mentioned. And so it's quite challenging to think about solutions that address all those needs. And so one of the things that we've discussed is that the IEEE framework and the micro-credentialing framework allows us to sort of rapidly prototype training programs and develop and adapt on the fly in a way that building new, university courses, much less degree programs, is not going to allow for in short turnaround.
Awesome, thank you. And so, I know that what should, and I guess this is for everybody on the panel, what should educators and training providers understand about this challenging environment that industry is facing and that training providers are facing when it comes to micro credentials? Because it sounds like A, we need to be talking to each other more, but B, because there are such regional differences, I think that it really is incumbent on, you know, the credentials to be able to be flexible enough to work in regional areas. So what should everyone understand and what do we do about this? And I'll throw it to each of you individually, and maybe I'll throw it back to Matt first to start.
Well, I said, yeah, I think what at the end of the day, what you're talking about is feedback loops. We struggle to have feedback loops through the education system, through to the industry and back again. I think, and that extends. And what's even more complicated about that is that it does your as you alluded at the beginning, that does extend not just to higher ed, that extends down into trade schools as well as high school and K through 12. I think that's one area that we've been pushing on and working on in the last several years, but we're not. It's very ad hoc. It's the feedback loops are tighter in some places, sometimes around the hubs that have been established. I've been very impressed with some of the things I've seen in California and Arizona, where there seems to be, where they're starting to get the connections going between the different stakeholders in industry. But then there's the whole rest of the world, the rest of and just the U.S., where we're still kind of scratching our heads and figuring out how do we get at the table together. One point that I just gravitated to describing is frameworks. I think one thing is, everybody is doing training whether they want to admit it or not. I mean, that's what you have to develop your workforce. I think if we start thinking about having training frameworks used within companies that are essentially on some sort of standard such that it aligns with a micro credential, that might be one of the ways that we can start to get that agreement. Like, look, this is how we train people. We would be willing to share this with your institute, with your university, with your school, so that we get people that are trained that way, and maybe start to build some consensus that way.
That's awesome. And Matt, before you finish, I know that IEEE USA is doing some work with their iWorks, getting people to the table. Could you just talk a little bit about that and how it might be helpful?
Yeah, well, that's to the point. I think one of the challenges we run into with building this consensus is that it can be easy to do like you said, with the big companies and some of the big areas, with the big school districts and the big universities, that there's already these natural connections. With what we're doing with the iWork events, we're going to all the other places where it's harder. It's really hard because what you find in those areas is there's less dominance of one industry. They're more diversified in terms of industry, and they're just more diverse overall in terms of the stakeholders, oftentimes geographically spread out. And so iWork events have been going on since 2023. We target these to go to places that in the U.S. that are more off the beaten path from the traditional tech sector. So the first one was in Little Rock. We've been to Maine. We've been to the Dakotas, Alabama. We go to those places, and what we do in those events is bring the academic sector together with the government sector and industry to talk about these issues, including workforce. And I've seen some amazing partnerships built out of those over the years that are seeding this kind of workforce ecosystem that we desperately need.
So maybe one of the solutions here is for training, university, academia to really look for events like these. And I did put a link in the chat for folks, and intentionally seek out industry partners where there might be some collaboration.
Exactly. And then, so that's where we found like IEEE comes in as a nice partner. Once they realize like there's this industry that they could be serving that has these needs, they have the university with its capabilities and skill set, and then IEEE can kind of help provide the framework. of how that can be adopted and maybe used even more broadly.
Awesome, thanks. And Adam, what are your thoughts here in terms of addressing this challenging environment? What are some of the solutions that you're looking at?
Well, I think, building on 2 points that Matt sort of laid out there. One is that I think, whatever we develop needs to be scalable, right? And, we don't want to say standardized to the point where it's inflexible, right? But it has to be able to be translated to other places. And a lot of that, at least what we're doing in Southern California at UCLA, starts with building partnerships, right? Like, we are a major R1 university, right? We train undergrads and graduate students, but a lot of what we've done and all of our workforce development efforts to date have been with local community college partners, right? And so we are working very closely with, 8 Los Angeles County community colleges, the Cal State system, to design curriculum that meet the needs of the actual learner, right? We're not just looking to train undergraduates. And so I was under no illusion that I know how to design educational content for a community college student, right? Or someone coming out of high school. I need to meet those students where they are to design, content that is actually value adding to them,
Right.
accessible to them, but then ultimately maps onto what their goal is, which is to get a job, right? To address the industry need. And so I think it starts in 2 places. I mean, I have not participated in the iWork thing, but it sounds like an opportunity to bring together stakeholders, right, from the different places, whether it be the industry side or even within academia, right? Because there's a big difference between UCLA and Pasadena City College, right, that we work very closely with. But there is a massive opportunity, right, to bring those groups together. And when you do it thoughtfully, develop, training content that can then be scaled to other places. Because at the end of the day, as Matt said, there's a difference in the technology sectors in different regions, also the capabilities in different regions. And so what we don't want to do is to create stuff that can only exist, at UCLA or in a place that has a massive academic clean room, right? We need to develop content that's accessible and scalable, and we need to be able to teach and train the trainer such that people don't have to come here, right? It has to really meet the need and the scale of demand. It has to be a different way of thinking than just, ad hoc regional, programs. And so this is again where I think IEEE being a sort of, gathering folks together around these topics is really, unlocking some strategy that I don't necessarily know is there because it tends to be very sort of focused around one's own local space.
Yeah, thanks. And in terms of the micro-credentials helping you do that, what are some of the things that you have been working with that help you get to making things that industry needs?
I mean, I think the micro-credential system is just super flexible. That's the biggest thing for us. I mean, I don't know that, people from industry necessarily understand how challenging it can be to even establish a new class at UCLA or at a major university, right? Like, you don't just snap your fingers and create a course, right? Like, and once you create a course and get it approved by the Senate, it doesn't get to change very easily, right? And so I think, as Matt also mentioned, the feedback loops or, short loops, rapid prototyping of educational content. We need to be able to do that because we're learning on the fly. We have, very time sensitive demands to bring this type of content to the community. And so the credentialing program gives us a level of flexibility to put together sort of bite-sized pieces that are stackable, meaningfully stackable. But if we need to change and course correct and adapt, we can do that. But it still comes with a level of rigor and an organization behind it that has a stamp that says that this has been vetted and validated and is valuable. And so that's where I think the micro-credential system for us has been really powerful, and it really attracts, especially in the semiconductor space. It means something to certainly this generation of students. We didn't have digital badges and these things when I was doing what these students are doing, but I think it's a really good framework to allow for rapid prototyping of educational content, but in a way that's rigorous.
Agreed.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you. And Melody, what are your thoughts here?
I'll underscore something that both Matt and Adam talked about, a couple of points. First of all, part of what this is a larger movement, and micro-credentials are helping facilitate this kind of new way of doing things, right? It's not, we're going to spend 2 years designing a curriculum and then people go through the curriculum and then maybe employers are like, I'm not sure I know what classes they took, I know what grades they got, but I don't know what they can do. And that time lag is concerning for many employers. And also, I think to Adam's point, for people also adding the R&D in the industry and really trying to advance this, the technological development. I think the first point is that like we're doing this differently now, and it requires thinking about our traditional silos differently and bringing partnerships around the table, bringing the collaborative nature in order to meet both the learner's needs and the workforce needs. The second or the third point I'd make is really around the value of this is that we can make learning visible. We can have the metadata behind that digital badge that a learner earns that says, here's what they know and can do in a way that like a traditional training transcript or a course description doesn't do. And so that the technology for that is enabling us to communicate better. And enabling the learner to have agency over their learning and to be able to communicate that back to employers. I also think, and we're already seeing this in a lot of other places, and Matt talked about it, employers are trainers. They are doing learning in their labs, in their on their floors. And so whether that's kind of real-time learning, whether that's apprenticing, whether that's opportunities for little micro trainings along the way, we can also make that visible too for those employees that are doing that and helping advance the workforce. So ultimately, I think we're doing things differently, but we also have mechanisms now to be more collaborative and also to convey that learning in a visible way.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. I think what we're really kind of unearthing here is that this is not an easy answer, but there is a lot of good work that is happening, and a lot of employers and a lot of training providers, whether they be university level, community colleges, and so forth. We are really looking for ways to help students, whether they be traditional students or adult learners or people who in apprenticeship programs. We're looking for them to be able to make their skills more visible and make them visible to employers in order to find jobs. So let's go on to the next slide if we can. And I do see some questions coming in, which we'll just get to in a minute. But I just want to talk for a moment about the IEEE credentialing program. We've referenced it several times today, and we've been talking a little bit about the flexibility of it. We do with the IEEE credentialing program really work to try to be a way for skills to be recognized that are the most important skills in a region to be recognized. Because the way that somebody is recognized, the skills that somebody needs in Arkansas, where Matt works, might be different from the skills that are needed in companies in California, and so on and so forth. And so really, one of the things that IEEE is really trying to do is enable the local training providers, wherever they are, to make available micro-credentials that are relevant to students in that area. And so that's really an important part. So what we do is we will look at all the different kinds of training that training providers put out there. And we have a committee that assesses it according to a framework that IEEE has created. And we will validate that those assessments are valid to say that somebody has the skills that they need. And so if you are interested in learning more about the IEEE credentialing program and how it might work for your program, we do encourage you to check out our website, which is credentials.ieee.org. You can also send us an email. I'll share that in a few minutes. But what I'd like to do now is hop over, because I see that there's all kinds of, the questions are certainly blowing up over here in the right. So let's jump into some of these questions. And I do encourage you, if you have other questions, please do feel free to take advantage of the chat. And so I'm going to start with this one. And I think this might be one for you, Melanie, which I've worked for 18 years in higher ed and have been involved in developing micro-credentials. I also find inconsistency in nomenclature that is being used in this space. For example, the use of skills versus competence. Do you want to address that real quick?
Boy, isn't that the case? Plus one on that comment about the nomenclature. And I think, as I mentioned, on one hand, smaller programs in the form of certificates and continuing education have been around for years and years. And we're now, as a field, coming to determine what we mean by a skills-based micro-credential. And what I have great appreciation for is that IEEE has defined what it means by that. And we're very clear about what we mean by that. We mean that seat time doesn't matter. Learning and the ability to do what that micro-credential says a person knows or can do, that's what's important. And so that really underscores the need for solid assessment, for solid skills validation, and particularly when it comes to those higher level, level 2 and level 3, performance-based assessment. A test won't do it, but there's also lots of ways of understanding and doing that assessment, and some sophisticated technologies for that as well. So you saw in that spectrum of kinds of credentials that IEEE has staked a claim around what we mean by skills-based micro-credential, and we have a very clear definition for that. And then in terms of skills versus competence, absolutely. What do we mean when we're talking about that? And so we have a lot of guidance that we're developing for educators and training providers. And we're leaning into some of the expert organizations, including the Competency-Based Learning Network, that's really been supporting the development of skills-based learning and skills-based hiring.
Thanks, Melanie. This next question is about the global applicability of micro-credentials. And Matt, I'm going to start with you, just kind of being our IEEE voice here. The question is about regions like India. Might have different cost constraints and things like that, but how do we take this globally?
Oh, yeah, I love that question when I saw it come in, because it got me thinking. Because we talked about, it's perfect for micro-credentialing. You presented earlier on the whole kind of spectrum of credentialing, right? Which the most common one we think of is a college degree. And, one of the most disruptive things you can have is to have, it's great. It could be great, but it's also very disruptive, is that an employee wants to go back to school, right? Mm-hmm. And so that taking classes, like it's a heavy commitment. Getting a micro-credential, and it's a heavy cost, right? Significant cost. A micro-credential, I keep noticing that when I have people come to me and say, hey, I want to take a micro-credential, it's a nice size chunk. The cost is a nice size, and the effort for them to do it is a nice size. It relieves some of our internal load in terms of training. It becomes a win-win-win. It's for those same reasons that I think micro-credentials are a huge opportunity for the developing world, because they're more bite-sized, and you can kind of pay as you go. And of course, we've always had creative models in IEEE to try to develop products that can be more affordable in different parts of the world. And so, yeah, I love that question, because it really got me thinking about that. It's like that's one of the things that we've been really excited about micro-credentials within our company. Is it's more bite-sized. It's just, we're all so busy. It's easier for us to for continuing education and developing skills.
Thanks, Matt. We had another question that was how these work with CEUs and PDHs. For people who don't know those acronyms, we have continuing education units and professional development hours. IEEE has actually issued these for over 30 years. The biggest difference that I see on these is that a lot of times those are issued based on completion of a segment of training. So it's less about specifically narrowing in on specific skills, but instead saying you have sat in a 1-hour class, therefore you have earned and you've taken some kind of an assessment, and therefore you have earned the professional development hour or the continuing education unit. So they are both important. And I will say that PDHs and CEUs are often necessary in licensing situations, especially in certain tech fields like power and energy. So they're each important. Sometimes they can happen in similar situations. Like we have some micro-credential situations where people do earn specific micro-credentials throughout the course. So you might get something in one skill and then another skill. And then when you've completed the course, the overall certificate gives you a certain number of professional development hours. So they're not mutually exclusive and they can work together.
Yeah.
So we have another question here that says, many institutions are designing strong skills-based micro-credentials, but these often remain isolated within programs or platforms. What infrastructure is needed to ensure these credentials are continuously captured, verified, and usable across the full education to employment journey, not just issued at completion? And Adam, I'm going to throw this to you first. Have you worked with this at all?
Yes, to some extent. I'm trying to tease out exactly what the question is asking.
You know what? Maybe I'll send it to Melanie first then, and then I'll come back to you. Does that work?
Yeah, sure.
It's a much bigger question than about skills-based microcredentials. It's really about the infrastructure that will allow a learner, an individual person, to carry their records forward regardless of where they go, and to allow hiring systems to be able to read that data in a way that helps connect that learner to opportunity. We see in the chat a conversation about the learning and employment record and a recommended practice. Thank you, Jim, for putting that in there. That's definitely part of that. And in the United States, different states are working on different strategies and infrastructures, but we're currently also seeing this federally in terms of the learning and employment record as an infrastructure, as a digital solution to having this data be interoperable and also not be constrained or owned by a training provider or an educational institution, but really being in the hands of learners and accessible to people who are seeking them. And so that's a whole other strand of work and probably 5 other webinars, but it's an important question as we're thinking about the broader changes in the workforce and learning ecosystem that many of us are working on.
Awesome. Thanks, Melanie. So Adam, I'm actually going to give you this next question in here, which is, on behalf of non-traditional adult students everywhere, we hear constantly about the shortage of tech skills, but it's not clear how to get from where we are to getting the in-demand skills. How do we know we're on the right path, stacking up the right micro-credentials? How are you approaching that at UCLA?
I mean, it's a challenging one to some extent. I think that the best thing that we can do is, obviously have the discussions we were talking about before, right? Like our pipeline is really validated by the fact that our end game is through demonstrating access to jobs, right? Like we have internship opportunities at the end of our 6 module sequence, right? We're starting to demonstrate placement of students into roles afterwards. I mean, I think, if you're talking about semiconductors, there's enough discussion out there about what the right skills are, but quite frankly, it's also challenging because even if I talk to colleagues at, one of the big fabs, the reality is that they do a ton of the training once the people get there. They want some very basic core technical competency. Something as simple as, have you ever put a bunny suit on before and gone into a clean room for 8 hours? Right? Like, do you understand what the implications of that job are in that environment? Because it's a specific thing that most people can't experience. And so, there's a lot to be said for identifying what the right path is. But I think if you can plug into, an organization that has a sort of a multi-layered approach to it that can demonstrate at the end game that they're placing people in jobs, then you de-risk it a little bit for yourself. We're trying to take a very sort of focused strategy because, I always say to people, of all the things we can do, what should we do, right? There's myriad things that we can do, but we want trying to put together a pretty well-defined, structured approach that has a clear, tangible output at the end. right? And that I think is something that you have to assess as a learner. Am I just taking a bunch of ad hoc things, or is there a programmatic focus on this where if I'm going to go down this path, do I understand what the outputs are going to be? And has this program demonstrated either that it's been informed by the job market or that it's demonstrated placement of people in those positions? It's challenging now because we're just starting, right?
Yeah.
We've rolled this, we've been doing this for basically, just going on 2 years. So sort of de-risking it is hard. But I do think the more the more you can gather from, the people who are delivering the content about how they've designed it and what it's for and who the partners are, can help de-risk it at least a little bit.
Yeah,
Excellent.
Adam, I have been very excited about the experiments that have been done around co-ops and internships over the last several years, because that is where we can meet in the middle, because we want the, we only have those students for a limited amount of time, and if we can set them up to where they're ready to kind of hit the ground running, is a win-win for them and the company. And so I think that is a great experimentation space. And then then the next step is, can we see what they got out of it, right? Did they get within the company? Did they get skills that transferred into Microcredential?
Awesome. Okay, well, there are still lots of questions, but unfortunately, we have reached the end of our time. So I do want to thank all of you for spending time with us today. A huge thanks to our panelists, Adam, Matt, Melanie. Um, this was a really fascinating conversation. And once again, I just want to encourage everyone, if your organization is interested in learning more about IEEE credentials and micro-credentials, please visit our credentials website. I think somebody's going to pop that into the chat, or reach out to our credentialing program team. You can see the contact information right there on the screen. And we are going to follow up with you. You will be receiving a recording of this webinar, I think within a week or so. And before you go, if you would not mind filling out our 2-minute post-webinar series survey, we would greatly appreciate it. We are working on a series of these, and we would very much like to get your input to make sure that these are valuable to you. So again, I thank you all for being here today. Oh, please.
Sorry, it just popped in my head. So I'm trying to
Absolutely.
see who asked the question. One thing I would highly recommend, and this is, I strongly believe in learning by doing, right? If you're going to pick a program, find one if you can where you're getting your hands on something.
Yeah.
Where you're actively doing something, like you're not just watching webinars and taking classes, right? Like if you have an opportunity to get into a space where you're getting your hands on something, the balance of just the knowledge and the physical, the hands-on skills, I think is a big differentiator for a lot of the programs.
That is great advice.
Totally agree. Totally agree. Great comment.
That is a perfect way to end today. So thank you all for being here, and we wish you a great rest of your day. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Thank you.